Hello and welcome to another episode of My Football Story from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Charlie Betts and joining me this week is Allan Jenkins. Now Allan has the massive accolade of playing in every single league in Scotland. He started his career at Stranraer, made his debut at the age of 16, officially at 16 and 20 days, but you'll find out a bit more about that. We talk about his time playing for various teams in Scotland, getting promoted, getting relegated. He was at the now infamous Gretna side that unfortunately went into liquidation but had a meteoric rise of 3 promotions in 5 years. We then spoke about his time when he then moved to Ballymena, which is where I would know him from. It's just an incredible football story. And for me, it's everything that this series should be about. It's about hearing the highs and lows of being a professional footballer, what comes with that, what he would maybe do differently. If you have liked what you've heard, then please don't forget to like, share and subscribe below. It'd be great for you to get some feedback on this because it's genuinely been one of my favourite interviews to do. You can follow us on Twitter at HonestFootballFree. But here is Allan Jenkins and his football story. Enjoy. And I'm delighted to say that Allan's joining us now. Allan, I really appreciate you obviously taking up your evening to talk to us. So, thanks for coming on. And it's been a sort of long time coming, so I appreciate that.
No problem at all, Charlie. Happy to be here.
So you had an illustrious career, which we're going to go through. I didn't, in terms of obviously finding out about your career, obviously through Ballymena, that would have been my main exposure to you. But you've played in every league in Scotland. We're going to go through all of that. But what we like to do with every pro that we've spoken to is go back to your first ever football memory. So be that playing, going to a ground. What was your first ever memory of football, really?
My first memory of going to is joining my local team, which was called Lochrian Boys Club. They trained at the local gym hall in the school, and I lived directly behind the school. About 5 minutes before training was due to start, I was in floods of tears and didn't want to go because you've been used to playing at your school with people you knew, and this was going to a club where there was different boys and you didn't know who was there, and so a wee bit of nerves kicked in. But thankfully I got rid of them, and quickly, in about 2 or 3 weeks into my time at Lochrian, there was actually a visit from another local player, Colin Calderwood, who's probably the most famous player from Stranraer. So Colin came along and visited us. So from me being a nervous wee boy at training to meet a proper footballer, Colin was playing with Swindon at the time. Obviously went on to Tottenham in Scotland and that. So that would be my first, in terms of my memory of playing. In terms of watching games, I've vivid memories of and I don't know why because I was 6-year-old, but the Skull Cup final, Aberdeen versus Rangers. I'm a Rangers fan, so 3-3. I can always remember Davy Cooper's free kick. Keeper nearly saved it on the way back out. He hit it that hard. And I remember my dad taking me to Hampden for my first Scotland game, which was Scotland v Argentina. And Scotland actually won 1-0. Stuart McKimmie scored. So they would be, for some reason, those memories, both playing and watching, are quite vivid in my memory. So nice to look back on.
It's incredible, really. I suppose even as now as a pro, having been a pro yourself, maybe the impact that you have on youngsters' careers, and that's you probably don't realise it maybe at the time, or it's only once you get a bit older. But like you say, you mentioned about Colin Calderwood or going to a live game, the impact that can have, and almost as an inspiration for some people to stay in the game, isn't it? Really.
I think that's why I've tried to move into coaching myself. My current role is the head of youth at Stranraer, and I've occupied that role for a few years now. And it's nice to try and give a bit back. And when we go into primary schools and into the community clubs in and around Stranraer, they do get a wee lift. And listen, if you can help one kid, you've did your job. So hopefully there'll be a long list of footballers to come for Stranraer in the future.
Well, you mentioned about going into schools, and that was we don't get a chance to normally talk to many pros about that, but I wanted to sort of ask in terms of some players develop a bit different to others. So for you personally, were you better than everyone else in your year at school, or was it a bit of a slower sort of journey for you, if that makes sense?
It certainly probably was a slower journey for me. Funny enough, I had this conversation when I was coaching the under-16s at Stranraer last week, and I was trying to tell them just to try and make the most of their ability, but first and foremost, you need to have the right attitude, you need to work hard, and you need to listen, because essentially I would try to tell the kids that there's living proof in front of you here that you can make it without being the best football player in the world. I think attitude and hard work stands you in good stead, more so than natural ability. So I was never the most naturally gifted player in the world, but I knew from very early on that that's a career I wanted to follow, and I just gave it my best shot. And listen, I had 7 or 8 years at part-time football before I actually made my full step into full-time professional football. So I learnt my trade and listened to those more experienced and took some proper tailings off and got my eyes opened by some old school managers about the values. But I think they stand you in good stead in football and in life in general. So try to pass that on and say hopefully it does the trick.
Yeah, I think it's such an amazing message, like you say, that, you know, I suppose academies are picking up children, probably more so in England, but, you know, age 6, 7 years old nowadays, you know, and it's such a sort of, it seems a bit of a strange thing. But you mentioned about maybe a slow sort of youth in that sense in terms of football, but then it picked up quite quickly because you obviously made your debut at 16 at Easter Road, which is it's quite a leap from, like you say, sort of having maybe a slow journey to football to then go into that. How did that sort of come about? Because obviously, you know, for someone of your age, I think you were like 16, 20 days, weren't you? Before you got to that stage, could you have gone elsewhere? Obviously, Stranraer is your local club, but what was the sort of build up to that point?
Yeah, so I played for a team in Ayrshire called Air Boswell, and that's about 51 miles away. So every Sunday I would go up from between the ages of 12 to 15. My dad would take us up, and there was a few of us from Stranraer, and they have this tournament called the Roselle International Football Tournament, and I had a really, really good tournament, and it led to some trials. Went to Ipswich a few times, Man City, Fulham, Blackpool, Blackburn. Some successful and some offers of YTS contracts and some unsuccessful. They decided that I wasn't for them. To be honest, the manager of Stranraer at the time was actually a full-time manager, Campbell Money. He, on a Monday afternoon, would take like the under-16 academy football team just for a bit of training, just to see if he could pick up one or two. I arrived at training, we did it for a number of weeks, and I arrived at training one night and he says, no, you're not to come tonight. So immediately you're like, shoulder slumped. He says, go home and I want you to report to the ground at 6:15 tonight. There's a reserve league game against St Mirren. And that was my first step at 15-year-olds to play with Stranraer reserves. And then it was like the Reserve League West, where it wasn't a development league, so it wasn't under 20s. You had guys coming back from injury. Right. You were playing with experienced players. So what a grounding it was. What an eye-opener it was. So from then on, I just kept on playing with the reserves and dipping in and out with first-team training. Believe it or not, I made my debut, the one you're talking about, when I was 16 and 20-odd days. I played as a trialist against Forfar in a 2-2 draw. That was my first proper game for Stranraer, but my debut as a signed player was, as you rightly say, against Easter Road. And we went, the preparation was horrendous. The bus driver went through the Edinburgh City Centre and we arrived about 2:10. Hibs had been relegated from the Premier League. Stranraer had been promoted from the second division. And you were going there just hoping you would put on a good show. So for me, running around a public park for boys club football to then go 12,000-13,000 Easter Road. Listen, I think I touched the ball maybe 5 or 6 times in the whole game. And I was playing against Pat McGinley, who went on to play with Celtic and had a great career. And listen, we got battered for 90 minutes. Jason Young scored a wonder goal. Tom Black scored a penalty. And we held on for grim death. And it's probably one of Stranraer's most famous results because of the golfing teams at the time, because the golfing class at the time. But I look back in those with fond memories. Maybe not so much. I had long bleach blonde hair. The Beckham look was in at the time, so maybe don't look back on the pictures so fondly. But I look back on the memories fondly. And listen, what a start to your career. We drew with Clydebank the following week at home, so we were back to earth with the bump. But listen, it was great that the manager showed faith in me to put me in, and I played 90 minutes, and then what a learning experience.
Well, I was just going to touch on that really quickly, Alan. I appreciate you being so honest about that, but what was your overriding emotion before the game? And because you were so young, is it almost not impossible to take it in the magnitude of it, or were you very nervous? Like, how did you approach it on a personal level?
Yeah, I think when you step out for the warm-up, when the manager names a team and you realise you're playing, you sit and obviously it starts to hit home. Well, wait a minute here, but it's when you step out when you enter the ground to start with, it's empty. But when you step out to the warm-up and you suddenly see bums on seats and the crowd starting to fill up, and it was such a world away from what I was used to in terms of boys club football, that you're probably just in awe of the whole situation. And yes, you've got nerves, but see, once the game starts, the game's just a game. And to be honest, you just block everything out. As I say, listen, I didn't have that many touches of the ball, so it's not as if I'd made too many mistakes. I just chased it for 90 minutes. Listen, I made a career out of chasing it for 90 minutes.
No. I've seen you play. You're being harsh on yourself there.
So, but no, You do have nerves, but I was very, very lucky that I had great teammates about me, experienced guys that basically took me by the hand, and they must have got sick of shouting my name, telling me to go here and telling me to go there. No, brilliant, absolutely fantastic memories.
Yeah, I sort of, to be honest, I mean, we could probably do a whole, a whole episode just on your time at Stranraer because so much happened there. But obviously, you were there for 8 years. It was just a period in that. Obviously, I know that Stranraer then went sort of a few relegations, but then there was that back-to-back promotion. I just wanted to sort of touch on that a little bit more. Obviously, I suppose you were a lot more established in the team on a personal level, but what made that side so successful? And because obviously, it was a sustained period of success in that sense, wasn't it? So, what was so special about that sort of team that you had?
Well, we'd been relegated and we had a new manager, Neil Watt, come in with his assistant, Stuart Miller. They built a new squad basically from scratch, kept one or two that were there from the previous years, but acquired a lot of good players from the junior leagues in Scotland. We started the season okay, but what I think was the key to our success is we were so lucky with injuries and suspensions that with great continuity. The team very rarely changed. The third game in, I think we went to Peterhead, we were 1-0 down. And the manager changed Alan Grant for Davy Graham, who went on to be my teammate at a few clubs. And Davy was lightning quick, came on, scored 2 goals, we won 2-1. And to be honest, we never looked back. I think what won is the league, and I've got a firm belief that this is how the teams win it. A lot of leagues are won in the dressing room. I honestly believe that. Right. See the togetherness we had in that dressing room. And Neil and Stuart were they knew how to be good cop, bad cop, manage the dressing room. And it just worked for us. And I think if you've got that togetherness in a dressing room and you go out and you're prepared to work and you're prepared to help your teammate, the possibilities are endless. And we just got ahead of steam. We just got consistency. Team very rarely changed, as I say, and we achieved back-to-back promotions, which is unheard of in Stranraer's history. I was the captain then, so I was more established, and I'm fortunate enough to score the goal that obviously secured the second promotion against Morton, which was very sweet.
Yeah, well, I've got to be honest, I've seen that. It's an incredible volley, so fair play to you. I've got to say, I saw the video of it, so you're doing yourself a disservice. It was more than just a goal, it was a beauty. But to be fair, on that then, obviously you mentioned about being captain. Did you, especially being one of the local sort of players, I know you probably heard that a lot. I don't want to ask you lots of the same questions that you get asked all the time, but did you feel like there was an extra responsibility because of that, or did you almost feel a bit more freedom because you were one of the sort of more local players?
I think Neil Watt was very, very clever with the selection of his captain, because I was a local boy and I've been doing well and the fans seemed to like me. There was more experienced players in the team than me, but I think he just tried to tap into that local and get the locals behind him if he made the local boy captain. And listen, I think I would have some leadership qualities, but again, that was my first step as being a captain. The one good thing about it was, more often than not in that period of time when I was captain, we were winning. So you got the plaudits locally. Previous to that, when I wasn't captain and you were losing, the bus would go back to Glasgow with the rest of the team on it, and you would stay in Stranraer, and you'd go out in the street on the Sunday and the Monday, and people say, "Oh, you beat again," and it's you were sometimes shared the brunt of the abuse. But listen, as I say, I'm Stranraer born and bred. I'm still here to this day. I'm now coaching with the club. I loved playing for Stranraer. Absolutely loved it, and it was such an honour to captain the club in a successful period of time. More so than that, just to represent the club and play at the ground where I grew up. That's where at Stair Park, that's where we used to have our boys' club finals. The final was always at Stair Park, and it was great to go there and play because this was the proper football ground. Yeah. So, great memories. I loved it.
If you're not me asking a slightly personal question, and obviously not after sort of numbers and stuff, but you know, it would have been part-time football. What were you sort of doing at the same time as that, or were you, how did that sort of work?
So initially, I was a postman, which was great because a great number if you're a part-time footballer because it keeps you fit. You were walking for 2.5 hours a day.
I suppose actually.
Hours a day. So that helped me, believe it or not. And then I made a jump over to become a community football coach with the local council, which would see me take sessions within schools and after school clubs, and that kind of was me dipping my toe into the first step of the coaching career, so to speak. So, but those were the two jobs that I did out with football, and I would be the only one from Stranraer. The rest of the squad were based in Glasgow, so I would travel to Glasgow twice a week for training, which is obviously 80 miles away. So being a postman, you could leave at like 4 o'clock and get to training for 6 on a Tuesday night, Thursday night. So that's what I did for, as I say, and I did that journey for the best part of 8 years, up and down the road twice a week, 3 times a week for games.
I think that's one of the sides that we don't. I think through doing lots of interviews with professionals anyway, but as a fan who sits in the stands, you don't see that sometimes I know as a fan, you think you've paid your money, it gives you the right to hammer someone, the left back for giving the ball away or whatever. But I don't think we see that side of it. We don't. The fact that, like you say, you'd be driving 2 hours each way or whatever it is, twice a week. And I'm not saying that excuses necessarily a bad performance, but we probably don't take that into account either. And it's fascinating to hear that side of it, really, if you know what I mean, in that sense. So the only reason I asked that was then obviously towards the end of when Stranraer in the first division, you then moved to Gretna, which would have been full-time football. So before we talk about that time at Gretna, how did that move come about? And more importantly, did you feel like it was a bit of a risk going from part-time where you had another job to then going into full-time football, which obviously has that element of risk to it, doesn't it?
Ultimately, that was where I saw my future, and I wanted to test myself. I wanted to be a full-time footballer, and Gretna were the up-and-coming team at the time. They'd been bankrolled by Brooks to go through the divisions, and I had a number of other options. And I wouldn't sit here and lie to you and say that Gretna financially was a huge jump from part-time football, and it dwarfed any other offers that I would have on the table. And I just felt, I went down and met Brooks Milson and Rowan Alexander, and they kind of sold the dream, sold the journey to me, where they wanted to go. And listen, they were signing good players from Premier League teams who I felt as though I could go and test myself in training, but also learn from midfielders in my position. John O'Neill, David Nichols, Steve Tosh, real good players who played at a high level. And to be honest, another one, it allowed me to commute because I had my roots and I was settled and I liked my family and friends around about me. The commute to Annan for training was actually less than what it was to Stranraer. It was like an hour and a half journey. So I wish I had £1 for every mile I did. I wouldn't have said. But it allowed me to kind of obviously keep my base in Stranraer and travel. And listen, it was what a roller coaster.
Yeah.
But great. I mean, the success stories, the tough times round about Gretna, but there'll never be a story like Gretna again. And I was just thankful that I was part of the good part of it.
Yeah, well, I sort of wanted to touch on the beginning part. I don't want to dwell on the other stuff because there's lots of stuff out there about that. But it'd be remiss of me not to talk about it maybe a little bit later on. But the first sort of thing I wanted to talk about was from a football and maybe fitness perspective. What was the biggest difference, apart from obviously training more often, between going from part-time to full-time football? And then how quickly did you have to get up to speed with that in that sense? And that?
Well, believe it or not, I made my debut against Morton. One of my future teammates, Chris Miller, went over the top of the ball on me in the second half. We were winning 2-0, and I thought, I'm doing well here. This is a good debut. I'd signed on the Thursday, hadn't trained with the team, just met them on the Saturday at Capello, and went straight into the team. And this was a kind of top of the table clash. So I'm thinking we're off to a good start. Midge Miller went over the top on me and tore my ankle ligament. So I was stretchered off 2 minutes into my debut. So I was on crutches, which didn't help because obviously I'd signed to full-time football, but because I was still a community coach with Stranraer, I had a notice period to work. So my community coach had spent on crutches for the last couple of weeks of my notice period. When I moved to full-time training, see, for the first 3-4 months, I felt as though I was a mile off it. Just with the sharpness and the intensity of training, see the training day in, day out, I was knackered at the end of the day, so I wasn't. It took me a good wee while to adjust to it. But I mean, you do adjust, and training with better players ultimately makes you a better player, and challenging yourself against better players makes you a better player. So no, it was really good, but it did take me a few months to adjust to the part-time and full-time. Yeah,
he sort of mentioned obviously about that sort of in that injury, I suppose, and coming back from that. And we spoke to a lot of pros about their sort of mentality towards injuries. And I think as an amateur footballer, that's the only thing I can relate to about you is obviously getting injured, whether you play, grassroots football or obviously at elite level like you have. How did you find doing the rehab? Because for someone like me, I found it quite depressing, quite sort of a negative experience for me. I don't know what's it like when you're playing as a part of a football team in that sense.
Well, absolutely, because I was eager. I was delighted when I signed for Gretna. I was driving back down the road with my dad, and emotion that this was me. I'd signed as a professional footballer, so to speak. I know Stranraer in the professional leagues, but a full-time footballer and a 3.5-year contract, a good contract, and full of aspirations. And to be kind of injured in your first game, it wasn't a calf strain that would keep me out for a week or so. This was a proper bad one. I actually thought I broke my ankle in the game, but obviously the diagnosis was that I hadn't. But doing the rehab, you want to hit the ground running when you're a new signing, and Gretna had paid money for me, so there's a wee bit of pressure, and you're basically 5-6 weeks down the line before you can even think to join in training. And then after an injury, you're always playing catch up. Gretna probably didn't see the best of me until probably the next season, where we came back, I was involved in a few games, and in and out of the team just because they were on a roll. They were getting to the Scottish Cup final. I get what you're saying. It's a tough journey, and it was new for me because I was in every day with the physio. Yeah. Whereas I've been part-time, you'd be rehabbing yourself and meeting the physio twice a week. So it was quite monotonous. And listen, it's upstairs. What you need to get it through in your mind that you can get back playing.
Moving on to a more positive experience at Gretna was playing in Europe for them. From a footballing perspective, what are the differences between playing, for example, in the Scottish First or Premier Division and then going and playing in Europe, in terms of like speed, physicality, that sort of thing? What's the difference?
It was great to qualify for Europa League, and we were thrilled and looking forward to the draw. And this is no disrespect at all. We drew Derry City, which so it wasn't. We didn't even get a chance to get out. They travel the world or travel to Europe for that, so to speak. So we drew Derry City, which I actually played against a lot of the Derry City players later in my career with Ballymena. I come across a few of them again, but you're like, oh, Derry. But then suddenly you think, I tell you what, we've got a chance here to get through. We went into it probably as favourites. Got off to a great start at Fir Park. Ryan McGuffey put us 1-0 up, and then they had a goal of the season competition in the second half. So they did. They just scored wonder goal after wonder goal. Kevin Deary scored a couple. Kieran Martin, and I'm referencing his name because I played against him when I was playing for Ballymena. Sorry. The biggest downfall of the whole thing is we went to the second leg, drew 2 each, obviously out because we beat 5-1 in the first leg, so we were out in arrear. Derry drew Paris Saint-Germain in the next round.
No! Oh my word! Oh gosh!
So if we'd have got through that, I might have been able to tell you what the difference in standard was like, but it just wasn't to be for us, unfortunately. The one good thing about Derry City was the away leg, where we got a private plane over to Londonderry, got on the plane, and we parked at the hotel, and there was a real buzz around, and we were actually sharing the hotel with Girls Aloud. So we were. And this is true. This is a true story. So they were playing because I think Nadine is from that area.
Yeah.
So Gretna had one floor of the hotel and Girls Aloud had the other. So me, David Graham, and James Grady were walking, see if we could, and you couldn't get near them because they were bodyguards everywhere. And this door opened, and this is true on both my wee girls' side. The door opened, and Sarah Harding from Girls Aloud walked straight past us, and we were just. And we'll wait. I think I was waiting on James, and James was waiting on Davy, and Davy was waiting me to say something. And she walked in one door, out the other, out of our lives forever. Never got a chance to speak to her. So that was maybe the highlight or the European adventure.
I was going to say, it's probably not a bad offset for not playing Paris Saint-Germain, I suppose, in that sense.
Exactly.
I just wanted to, in terms of the time at Gretna, and as I say, I don't want to dwell on it at all, but obviously, Gretna then came towards the end of your time there. I think you moved maybe just before they went, unfortunately, into liquidation, for the want of a better phrase. But did you get that sense that the club was probably heading to the wall? And when did that sort of come around? Was it just that last season or before that?
Probably before it. My pre-season, my first pre-season with Gretna, we went to Austria. No expense spared. Shared the same facilities that Real Madrid used. And you're thinking, wow, what a setup this is. Played in the first division. I played 35 out of 38 games. The famous game against Ross County when we secured promotion, I actually watched from the stand. I wasn't even selected for the squad, so that was a real low point for me. You feel as though you're no part of it on the pitch, but when you take a step back and reflect, I played a huge part in the season, and you suddenly look forward to what's ahead. During pre-season, Mick Wadsworth had come in as a director of football, and Mick had actually pulled me to the side and told me that if I could find another club, I was free to leave. This was right at pre-season when we first came back to report. So from the excitement of looking forward to the Premier League is suddenly tinged with a bit of, I might be out on my ear here. But again, I refer back to the qualities that I think stood me in good stead, and I just basically worked my backside off in pre-season and managed to force my way into the plans for the first game of the Premier League. But pre-season, in preparation for the Premier League, we went to Preston University. So from Austria with Real Madrid facilities to halls of residence at Preston University, I think we thought maybe something's not quite, maybe funds are tight here. It just seemed to snowball. Listen, the Premier League was great. Playing at Ibrox, Parkhead, Tynecastle, and I played, and I was fortunate enough I scored the winner in the first game that Gretna won in the Premier League. I scored against Dundee United. So good memories, but it quickly became apparent that behind the scenes, the club wasn't viable. We were playing out of Motherwell, which 300 or 400 fans, And just prior to me leaving in January, Davy Irons, who went on to be my manager at Morton, had kind of pulled the Scottish boys and the boys who'd been there for a period of time and said, listen, if you can get out because the club's going under. Myself, James Grady, Martin Canning made the move on the last day of the window, and the club sadly went into liquidation a matter of months after that. Listen, Brooks followed his dreams. He sat in front of me when I first signed and says, I want to get to the Premier League, I want to get a club in Europe. And we did both. It's just a shame that Gretna with 3,000 people was never probably set up to have a Premier League team in terms of a fan base and that. But what an adventure. So when you look back and think about it, wow, crazy. This will give you a wee insight. And this is we're no blowing our trumpets here. We played Stirling Albion, and Brooks Milson had a real disregard for the Stirling Albion chairman. Right, so we're playing on a Tuesday night. We're probably about 16, 17 points clear in the league. It's a nothing game. And we were on 250. This will tell you why we went the way we went. We were on 250 quid a win. So Brooks always said against Stirling, it was double win bonus. Right, so 500 quid a win. Right, and then he comes into the dressing room beforehand and says, but you know what I think of these lot? It's 100 quid a goal and 100 quid a clean sheet. But we're miles clear. We've won the league. There's nothing to play for. And there's about 300 folk coming through the gate at max. So we went and beat Stirling Albion 6-0. And I'll never forget Steve Tosh when we scored the sixth goal in the 86th minute, running in the net to get the ball, to get it back to the... So if you think about it, we're paying out, 1,200 quid bonuses to 16 people, and you probably made about $3,000 through the gate.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's just crazy. But listen, it was great to be part of it, and it's a part of Scottish football history that I don't think will ever be repeated. So
there was a rumour that I'd, from my brother-in-law, had actually heard about the chairman giving the man of the match his sports car for the week or something like that. I don't know if that's true. Is that true? Is that correct?
Absolutely true. And before that, it was, and that was in play before I came. So
right.
Brooks had an Aston Martin DB9, and whoever got man of the match got it for a week. But I since realised it was a curse for some of the players because they all lived in Glasgow, and it cost a fortune to fill the thing up with them. So as good as it was, as delighted as they were to receive it, they were thinking, this is going to cost me a fortune this week. But that's true. He did an Aston Martin. I'm sure if we'd won the Scottish Cup, there was talk that Kenny Ducker was going to be getting one on his own. So there was. But listen, that's just the way he was. A multi-millionaire. You can do what you want with your money.
Oh yeah, and I think I know it's obviously you never like to see a club go under, but it's these sorts of stories is why people like us love football outside of the Premier League in England, and all that kind of thing. It's that it's that kind of stuff that keeps you going almost. But I know we could probably talk about Gretna on the whole evening, couldn't we? But we'll move on a bit more in that sense. You've gone to Greenock Morton then off the back of that, as you said. One of the sort of points I wanted to sort of talk to you about was obviously you kept them up, and actually you played in every league in Scotland, which is an incredible achievement. But one of the times at Greenock was obviously you had to beat Partick by 3 goals on the last day of the season to stay up. And just because you're the first player we've ever spoke to who's been in that situation, when you're playing a game and it's not just a case of winning, but by winning by a certain number of goals and you rely on the other results, etc. What goes through your head? Do you get noises from the bench, the fans, what the scores and all that is, how that works?
Of course, and they're horrible games to play in. Absolutely horrible. You don't sleep the night before because listen, everybody's desperate to be part of success, and nobody wants to be part of failure. And being relegated is failure. And see, for a club like Greenock Morton, which has got the potential to be a huge club, should have been nowhere near the position we were in. But if you get relegated, you get relegated because of what you do in the pitch, or what you don't do in the pitch, so to speak. And as football players, you don't want that. I've had a couple as I say, with Stranraer, and the kind of emptiness you're left with, as I say, because you'll not likely stay at a football club forever. But it's the fans, it's the old guy that supported them for 20, 30 years that suddenly watch his team getting relegated. And you do feel that coming through the stands. So there was a huge amount of pressure. The good thing about at Greenock Morton was, as I said about the potential fan base there, they took a huge travelling support and filled the goal behind at Firhill. And it felt in the second half, Kevin Finlayson and Brian Wake scored, and we knew we need another goal. And it genuinely felt as though the crowd, because the whole end behind the Partick Thistle goal was pulling the ball in towards them. And once we got the other one, you think, we'll be okay here, because it was just, the game had just turned in our favour. And listen, you celebrate for a second after it because you've avoided relegation, but when you take a step back, it's probably not something to celebrate. It's more relief you're sharing with the fans rather than a celebration. I'm thankful I've not been involved in a lot of relegation games because it's a totally different pressure from like a cup final when you're wanting to win, but it's not a nice pressure. But thankfully it ended positively for us.
Yeah. How do you sort of view your time at I know we didn't get to sort of chat. Obviously, I suppose Gretna was such a huge thing in Scottish football, but how did you sort of view your time at Greenock Morton?
Yeah, I mean, again, we were unfortunate at the time, the 2 seasons. We probably underachieved because when I look back on paper and you look at old teams and lineups and that, we had a real good side. I had 3 managers in the 3.5 years I was there. In fact, that's a lie. I had 4. I had Jim McAnally, who signed me, who resigned 2 weeks after he'd signed me. I made that good an impression. He resigned. And then I had Davy Irons, as I say, followed me. Then James Grady, then Alan Moore. So, I mean, that alone, 4 managers in 3.5 years tells you that it just wasn't quite right at the club. And it's such a shame because it's a great club with a real good fan base. We run into a good St Johnstone team under Derek McInnes, and we run into a good Inverness team. I think anybody that was there during my time would probably look back and say we definitely underachieved. Playing side, I enjoyed it. My last season was great. I think I scored 12 goals for midfield and won Player of the Year awards. And listen, I probably would have stayed at Gretna, but what probably folk don't realise is the contract was on at Gretna. Morton took it over for 3.5 years. So essentially, my contract was 6. I'd been on the same contract for 6 years.
Yeah.
The world had changed, football had changed, finances had changed, and as I said, I had a very successful season personally in my last year, and Alan Moore wanted me to stay, and I was quite positive about staying. And then he says, "Listen, it's a 50% wage cut." Just to fall in line the way the club was, we went from getting 4,000 or 5,000 to maybe 2,000 supporters through the gate. So the club had to be run right, and you understand that. But that was kind of it was probably a financial reason that I left Morton. I would never say a bad word, but I enjoyed it, but underachieve, I think would be a fair point to describe my time at Morton.
No, I appreciate you being so honest about that, Alan. That's just quite refreshing to hear that. Which then leads on to the next point. And obviously, I mentioned to you before we started recording that I'd spoken to your friend Jim Irvin, and his question for you, and I completely echo it, and I'll sort of go into it. Why not as harsh as this, but he said, "What the heck brought him from Scotland to Ballymena?" Which I can understand what he's getting at, but for me, I suppose someone of your pedigree and experience, Ballymena wouldn't necessarily be one of the biggest clubs in Northern Ireland and part-time football and all of that. How did that come about and sort of why, really?
Well, again, as I refer to the obviously the financial aspect of the contract on offer from Greenock Morton, I probably sensed that was coming a few months out. I had a close friend, Gary McCutcheon, who was playing with Ballymena at the time, who'd been in Ireland, had played with Portadown and Larne, and always spoke very highly. And myself and Cutchy grew up. We've coached together just now with the Stranraer youth team, so I see him more than I see my wife, to be honest. But I'd actually went over and watched Ballymena play Kilrain, and Cutchy had spoke to the manager at the time, Roy Walker. I went and met Roy and had a brief chat with him, and that was it. That was the extent of it. It was just an introduction, how you doing, blah, blah, blah. And I think Roy did his homework. And as I say, my last season at Morton, I think I scored 1 goal between August and December. And then I think I scored 10 or 11 between December and the end of the season. So Roy's obviously came and watched me on a good day. So he did. So they offered me a contract. We spoke towards the end of the season, and they made me a good offer. And I was reflecting on my career and thinking, well, achieved everything I can possibly achieve. I can't win the Scottish Premier League because I'm not good enough to play for Rangers or Celtic. So that's it. But I've played in it. I'd spent, God knows how many years playing in the Championship, League One, League Two in Scotland. So I thought it might be quite nice just to get a wee change of scenery. As I say, Cutchy spoke very highly of it. And when you go to Ballymena, Ballymena's not the biggest club, as you say, in Northern Ireland. But it's a great setup.
Yeah.
I mean, the stand, it's fantastic. And the thing that struck me first and foremost was the way the people treated me. And I was a stranger. I was just there for a game, but they were so nice, so welcoming. And ultimately, myself and Roy and the chairman spoke over pre-season and made me an offer which was fitting into the way I was going to take the next step in my life to help my family and things like that. So it just worked, and I thought, let's try a new adventure. If you'd have said to me then, would I be there for 6 years? I would have probably said no chance. But listen, I wish I was still there now. Everybody knows how much I think of that club. Absolutely loved it, so I did.
Well, there's one part, if I'm honest, we're just going to take a break from you as the footballer, and there's one thing I wanted to talk about, because I was sort of told about, obviously, you were still living in Stranraer. I just assumed, because obviously I didn't know, it's my first experience with football. And there's a lot of sort of stories, not stories, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding you and getting the boat from Stranraer to, obviously, Northern Ireland every week. How did that work? Because obviously, I suppose for training and stuff, I don't know, did you stay in Scotland and train? But more importantly, Jim mentioned a couple of times about being late for warm-ups and stuff, but that's not sort of for me to comment on. But, how did that sort of work for you?
No, that's just me. That's just because I hate warming up. That's all. That's the only reason. That's just an age thing. You get to an age you can't be bothered warming up. Fortunately, Ballymena are sponsored by McBurney Transport, who has got a huge amount of haulage going through P&O. Right. So myself and Gary would get the 10:30 ferry from Cairnryan, which is 5 mile away. We'd take a car and we'd just drive half an hour up the road to Ballymena, and it's half an hour to Belfast. It's an hour to Glenavon and Portadown. Yeah. So. There was times when you were cutting it fine, but more often than not, listen, I never missed a game because of the boat. No. I almost did, myself and Gary. There was a County Antrim Shield semi-final against Crusaders, and we went out to get the 1:30 ferry. It was cancelled, so our next port of call, believe it or not, this is crazy, we drove to Glasgow. My dad drove us to Glasgow, and we got a flight from Glasgow to Belfast. Somebody picked us up from Belfast. Blah, blah. So the flight was delayed. We eventually took off. The flight, and honest, I've never been so terrified in my life. The pilots had 2 goes at landing at Belfast Airport. The wee woman, it was rocking. I'm thinking, get me off this plane. Honestly, God. And I turned round, and it was a player that used to play with Ballymena at the time, Denver Gage. His wife was a air hostess. Right. I'm turning round. She's as white as a ghost, like this. And I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So we eventually got there at half time, and we were 1-0 down, and Stuart Dallas scored for Crusaders. Right. We went on to great things. Myself and Gary went straight. The manager made 2 subs at half time, which I thought was a bit like as if he was bringing Lionel Messi and Pele on at the time, but wasn't quite. We didn't hit that effect, and we lost 1-0. But that would be the only time that we never made it. But it just worked. It just became a routine. 10:30 ferry. You want it back to 10 o'clock. I didn't go home to 10 o'clock at night. But listen, that's football. And if you love the game, that's what you do.
Obviously, I suppose the inclement weather anywhere in the UK, I suppose there must have been times when the game got called off. Was that a bit frustrating? Like you have to wait in for a pitch inspection at 1:30 or something like that. I don't know,
There was a couple where I arrived late on for a night game. The game was cancelled. There was one, we were due to play Glentoran, and Gary was at that time playing with Crusaders, but we were both sharing the same boat. And Crusaders was an artificial pitch, so they were on, and about 10:10 our game got cancelled. So I'm up at the captain's desk saying, I need to get off the boat, because I'm thinking, if no, I'm going to Larne and I need to wait in the next boat. I'm going to be waiting for about 6 hours here. So I was badgering the captain, I need to get off the boat. And I said, there's an emergency at home, I need to go. They let me off the boat, to be fair to him. Then they want to go to Larne for a round trip. But cancellations are part of football, and it's just part of the game. You just roll with whatever gets put in front of you.
Yeah, no, I think just because obviously, especially me living in England and watching football here, the concept of even getting a boat to play a game is just, baffling. But obviously playing at Ballymena, I mean, for me, I suppose it's got its certain brand, which I think is unfairly sort of sometimes. There's some cracking footballers there as well. You get a lot of people from the outside. But how did you find that going from, obviously, or from a football perspective, from Scotland to there?
I think lower league football and the Irish Premier League, I think probably Championship, they're probably quite close, and we've probably saw that evidence lately with Crusaders and Linfield being in the Challenge Cup in Scotland. They've played against teams of that level and been successful against some of them. So listen, my first game we went to Lisburn Distillery, 1-4-1, and my next game at home to Glenavon, at half time we were 3-0 up. So I was sitting thinking, this is a piece of piss, this league. The game finished 3-3, and I soon became clear that it certainly wasn't going to be that easy. And as you see, because Linfield were so strong at that time, there was a great Cliftonville team. Crusaders were a real physical team to play against. But as you say, loads of good players have come out of the Northern Irish League. Liam Boyce, Gavin White, Stuart Dallas. So now there's a lot of talent. And what I really liked is probably what you like, see the competitive nature of the games. Games are so competitive. There's no gimmies in the Northern Irish League, and it suited my style of play. As a reference back to how I was as a player, I was never somebody that was going to nutmeg somebody and put it in the top corner for 20 yards or that. But I was a hard working, honest player, and I think the Northern Irish League, with a lot of quality in it, is also a hard-working, honest league.
Obviously, going back to your sort of career there, I suppose Ballymena would be, I don't like to use the cliche, but known as a cup side and that sort of thing. But there's so much more to it. I think, I always loved the Boxing Day games against Coleraine. As a fan, I can only imagine what they're like as a player. But why do you think that mentality of maybe Ballymena being a cup side, sort of how did that come about? And do you think that was true, I suppose, is the question I'm asking?
Well, I think you would say it would have to be true, because over the course of for Ballymena to win the league, all the stars need to line up for one season, really, to be honest. And they run Linfield close a matter of seasons ago. But the better players are consistent week in, week out. And listen, that's no disrespect to any of my teammates at Ballymena. That's just because the squad at Linfield at the time, the squad at Cliftonville at the time when they won it, and Crusaders at the time, consistently performed better in the league than we did. And that's probably the long and short of it. Over my time, we were successful in the county anthem. We got to the Irish Cup final, we got to the League Cup final on a few occasions. So the stats would tell you, yeah, we were a cup team. And I don't know whether that's just perhaps in the back of our minds, we didn't believe as a group that we could win the league because of the quality at Linfield. But we thought, hey, we've got a chance here. On our day, we can match them. Over the course of a season, we might struggle to match them. But in a cup, any one-off game in a cup game, we can match these teams, and maybe there was that mindset. I don't know, but it's a fair point that we would be viewed as a successful cup team, and I think for the reasons I pointed to earlier on.
Just the last thing I wanted to sort of talk about before we go on towards the end of it, but what's it like playing in those Boxing Day games and that sort of environment? Because as a fan, it's probably my favourite day of football, but I suppose for you, maybe you've got the discipline of Christmas Day and all of that before. How does it sort of work for you?
No, listen. When you're involved in football for as long as I've been involved, Christmas and New Year are out the window. The football and the Boxing Day games are brilliant. Listen, we had a real poor record in my early years at Ballymena against Coleraine, and then the tide turned and we had a really good record. The one you're talking about, I was actually playing up front. We had a kind of injury crisis. I was playing up front with Cush, with David Cushley, and we beat them 3-2, and I scored my first goal, probably one of my favourite goals at Ballymena. Cush reversed a pass into me, and I've scored. And there seemed to be 10,000 Ballymena fans there. There would obviously be a few hundred of them, but the noise and just the elation. And I've got a great picture back in my house. So I'm kind of standing. It's for the back of me with my number 10 with my arms in front of the Ballymena fans. And they're great occasions. Listen, you win some, you lose some, and I've got a lot of respect for the people at Coleraine because they were good with me. The fans actually they slaughtered me, but in a good way, because you give it back. And listen, that's what football's about, and I love those occasions. And thankfully, the more recent memories are better than the ones further back where we had a tough time against them.
So obviously you mentioned that, and I think towards the end of your time at Ballymena, and it was obviously a time that I was sort of coming to watch and stuff, was, particularly your last season was an incredible season, fourth in the league. Was that probably your favourite season at Ballymena, that last one there, or not? Yeah,
that would be my most successful season. So it's easy to look back and say, that was my favourite season. Probably the biggest contributing factor to that being my most enjoyable season at Ballymena was the manager at the time. Obviously, we'd had Roy had signed me, who I got on well with, and that's no disrespect to Roy Walker or Glenn Ferguson at all, who I rate them both very, very highly, and they were good for my career. But when somebody of the stature of David Jeffrey comes in, who's won as much as what he's won in Northern Irish football, along with Brian McLaughlin, when they come in and just the presence of the man, just the way he speaks, and I was 34th, so I wasn't like a boy in awe, but he was terrific. The best I've worked under, absolutely the best I've worked under. What a man! I couldn't speak highly enough of him, and him being in the dressing room, and me probably recognising that coaching's next on my list, watching him and how he conducted himself. So it was probably an education both on the pitch and trying to get an education for what lay off the pitch at the time. But successful. The League Cup final was obviously a highlight and an emotional time for me, as you probably know, you maybe read, I don't know. And then for my last game to be at the showgrounds to win 2-1 against Glenavon and secure European football, which for Ballymena is a huge financial impact on the club. I just thought at that age, and I thought, listen, one regret is I I wish I'd have played for David Jeffrey when I was maybe 4 or 5 years younger. And I just thought, now's probably the right time to go. You know in the back of your mind, the legs are starting to get a wee bit heavier after 20 minutes. No, I'm only joking, after an hour or so.
No, I've seen you play enough to know that's not true. No.
And you just think that maybe this is the right time to go out in a high. That season, just as I say, scoring the cup final and getting to Europe, not a fairy tale season, but just capped the end of a really good year for me. And I thought, this is the right time to go. But the biggest influence for me would be David Jeffrey in that season.
Yeah, I think obviously, like you say, when you work under someone who's achieved what he has in the game, I suppose that leads on to our next question quite nicely, which is obviously you mentioned throughout this sort of chat about what's still working at Stranraer, the sort of coaching aspect. Maybe working under someone like David Jeffrey is quite an inspiration. But if you don't mind me asking a slightly personal question, was that always your intention to sort of stay in the game? Because obviously, I suppose you're never going to play forever. And if so, where do you maybe see that going in, say, another 5 years' time? Would you like to be maybe first team football, like in terms of obviously the coaching aspect of it, or what? How does that sort of pan out for you?
Yeah, as I say, obviously, my first dip my toe into coaching and early on in my Stranraer career, where I did the community coaching side of things. It probably wasn't until my Morton days where I thought I should start doing my coaching badges, and I did one of them. And then when I actually joined Ballymena, and I went back to part-time football. Gary McCutcheon and another friend, James McLeod, they were involved with the Stranraer youth set-up, and they said, "Hey, big man, you've got a bit of time in your hand, you fancy helping out?" And listen, that's my club. Stranraer's my club. Well, Stranraer and Ballymena are my club, so to speak. But I just thought it's the right time, and I love coaching. And see, when you go and coach, it helps you understand the game. I would advise any young player to do your coaching badges when you're playing, because it gives you a different outlet on how the game's a different understanding of how the game's played and what coaches are expecting of you. So I would advise that. But I've went through now. I've got my youth A licence and that, so I've only really got my pro licence left to do. So I'm thoroughly enjoying coaching the youth players at Stranraer, and hopefully a few of them will go on. We had 5 of our reserve squad local players make their debut last year, which, when I go back to talk about me being the only one for Stranraer travelling to a squad in Glasgow, the reason we've got this reserve squad is to try and give local Stranraer players an opportunity to try and play for the local team, and thankfully the pathway seems to be opened up for them. So I'll keep helping them. Have I got aspirations of being a first team manager? Absolutely, and I would like that to be my next step. But it's about getting the right opportunity at the right time, as football is. Football's a lot about being at the right place at the right time, and I look forward to that adventure when it comes. But hopefully, if I can have a successful career as a manager as I've had playing, then I'll be quite happy.
What we always like to do, Alan, I know you've probably been asked these quite a few times, but we always like to finish on a bit of quick fire sort of questions. So your favourite ground that you've ever played at, and obviously you've got a massive choice because you've played across all these different leagues, haven't you? So.
Favourite ground for me is pretty easy. Tynecastle at Heart of Midlothian. Crowd are so close to you. The stand just seems to go up forever. And we drew 1-1 with Gretna there, and it was my first kind of real, this is a proper Premier League ground. So Tynecastle, great atmosphere, and look back on that with fond memories.
I'll be honest, I thought you were going to say Ibrox, actually. I've been there quite a few times. It's an incredible place to watch football. I can imagine what it's like playing there,
Well, the only reason I would, as a Rangers fan, when you step onto the pitch at Ibrox, you're like, wow. But Rangers beat us 4-0.
Yeah,
so it wasn't as if the place was jumping the way see when I go as a supporter and the place is rocking, you think, wow, this must be great to be on the pitch. But for me, being on the pitch, the stands it wasn't a competitive enough game for the atmosphere to be bouncing. So I probably missed that bit. But as I say, when we played Hearts, it was a full house. It was 1-1. It was nip and tuck, and it was a real good atmosphere. So that probably swings it for me that way.
I'd normally ask about your favourite manager. I think we've already sort of covered that one. So obviously, your favourite player to play with and against, and you don't have to mention Jim Irwin just because I spoke to him the other day, or anything like that. But who's your best player that you've played with and against in that sense?
The best player I've played with is Davy Graham, who actually plays in Northern Ireland now for the Welders. We played together at Stranraer. He had a huge impact in pace and trickery, and scored great goals. And I mean individually great goals, and obviously important goals for us at Stranraer. And I think the way I look back on Davy more fondly than others is, with the help of Davy Graham's goals, that brought me my first silverware as a captain. And he was a huge part of it. And as I say, when he left halfway through the next season, when we secured our second promotion, he left such a huge hole in the team, and we really had to pull together to fill that void. But I was fortunate enough to play with him at Gretna again, and just on his day, a world beater.
Well, this series originally started with us just interviewing people who weren't footballers, just fans and stuff, about their favourite ever game that they've watched. And then since we started speaking to professionals, we sort of we branched out to give you sort of 2 favourite games. So one that you've played in and you were directly involved in, and then one just as a fan. It could have been on TV, you could have been at the ground. So what would be your 2 favourite games, one as a player and one as a football fan?
I think that, and again, because I referenced the reasons for off the pitch.
Yeah.
I think my favourite game's the League Cup final. Because I knew how much it meant to the Ballymena fans. I knew how much it meant to me as a player to try and help these people achieve a bit of silverware. We'd won the County Antrim Shield, but it's kind of disregarded as a major trophy. And we'd hit the post a few times in the Irish Cup final and the League Cup final previously. So to finally get that one over the line and to score a goal, and to obviously the week leading up to it were to do with my mum and her health scare at the time. I remember jumping after I celebrated, and you can see it in the highlights. I jump when I celebrate to score, and see when I hit the ground. I never jumped that high. I'm not that good. I jumped 3 inches off the ground, and when I landed back, just this surge of emotion just went right through me, and I actually covered my face after celebrating with Jim Irvin. Covered my face. So for me, both on the pitch and off the pitch, that's my most favourite game to be involved in.
Yeah, I appreciate you being so honest about that, and we'll not sort of dwell on the other parts, but I think that's an incredible game and one that I thoroughly enjoyed watching. But what about as a fan, whether one on TV or a ground that you've been to?
Oh, listen, I was at the Old Firm Cup final. Rangers beat Celtic in the League Cup final, and it probably the first one I'd been to, one of the very first few Old Firm games I'd give, because what I would do if I was lucky enough to get tickets, I would give them to my mum and dad.
Right.
I had tickets for believe it or not, I had tickets for the Scotland-England playoff years ago when Scholes scored 2 at Hampden. Wow. I gave both tickets to my mum and dad, and without even thinking, and the tickets were right next to the England fans. They absolutely loved it, and I'm sitting watching it on a screen at home. But listen, they did so much for me, so you try and give them a wee bit back. But the Jelavic scored to win Rangers the League Cup final. I think it was Vladimir Weiss won a quick free kick. Jelavic in, and his toe poked it past, I think it'd be Fraser Foster in goal at the time. Hit one post, it rolled across the line, and the Celtic defenders chasing it back, and it just sneaks over the line. So for me as a Rangers fan, to go and watch Rangers win a cup final against their biggest rivals was an occasion I look back on favourably. No, I was going to say, hopefully I'll see Rangers win a few more trophies this year. Fingers crossed.
So 2 cracking games to finish on, Alan. And I just wanted to say, this has genuinely been one of my favourite interviews. So I can't thank you enough. I've kept you for far too long, but I can't thank you enough for giving up your time to talk to us. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll hopefully catch up with you soon.
Don't mind, you're a gentleman. Thanks, Charlie. All the best.